Yes, hello, folks. Welcome to the weekly Manchester United podcast. I'm your host, as always, Phil Brown, joined with my excellent regular co-host and therapist, James Rhodes, of course, from United Muppetiers. This time last week, we were in giddy mood, and we are back to reality as we should expect with Manchester United. It's funny, mate. 1-0 is not a disastrous result, but the result is an imposter in this scenario, as Xavi once said, because it was the most one-sided 1-0, but for the reasons why United lost, we will cover on this podcast. But before we do that, how was your weekend?
It was decent. Aside from that, it was actually pretty decent. Otherwise, had a good family time and all of that. And yours?
It was not it wasn't a bad weekend. It was nice until, of course, United, of course, when I was watching United, there was boxing on the other TV, and thankfully that was a positive distraction for the most part.
Oh yeah.
Watching United, so much to talk about today, of course. The performance itself, the fallout from the performance, some of the stuff which I'm sure you spoke to our individual this morning, or any of us who
Yep.
was giving
Yep.
some
Yep.
interesting updates on what's the latest there. Encouraging signs at the very least. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about what his views are on Ten Hag, or their views are on Ten Hag, we should say. We'll obviously look at Ten Hag fair and objectively, and we'll look at what we saw at the weekend. And to be honest, it doesn't matter where you sit on this debate, you have a good argument. Doesn't matter
Yeah.
whether you say sack Ten Hag today, you would have a decent argument. Doesn't matter what you say you shouldn't, you would have a decent argument. Doesn't matter, because there's so many things that are plausible at this point that it's very difficult to single anything out and say it's definitely because of this, because of the absolute chaos at the football club. First of all, we'll talk about the performance at the weekend against Newcastle. United haven't scored a goal against Newcastle in their last 4 league games. They were trounced in the Carabao Cup 3-0. And you would expect, okay, 3-0 against Everton, there's a confidence building result. They go out against Galatasaray and play, in my opinion, astonishingly tactically naive. And this is where I think Ten Hag does deserve some criticism. Goes out against Newcastle, and what we saw against Newcastle was what we saw against Spurs in the 6-1 game, against Besiktas here away, against Leipzig away, against Liverpool away, against City away, Liverpool at home, City at home. And it's just it's a defining trait of this football club over the last 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you said in the beginning on this, the thing that's important, I think, to take in mind is that we're not talking about absolute truths when we talk about the opinions and perspectives on everything that has happened, on the performances, on Ten Hag, on the players, on all of it. None of these are objective truths. They're just perspectives. And unfortunately, I think there's so much wrong that you can't solve it easily by saying, oh, it's just the one thing. It's just this. If only this was fixed, then, everything would be better. It's not. The Newcastle game was, I think, when you look at it as a whole, when I take it and try to box it up and say what was wrong, it was everything. It was absolutely everything. The effort levels were, of course, astonishing, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but they were terrible. Um, just to touch on that first, because I don't want to give anybody to get the perspective that this is something that should be brushed off or ignored. I don't care what your thoughts are on the manager. I have my own thoughts on the manager, on tactics, on perspectives. This is one of the problems at United that I do want to talk about later. You don't play for the manager. You shouldn't play for the manager. That's not who you're playing for. You have your teammates that you should play for at the very least. You can play for your teammates. You can play for the fans. You can play for the club. You can play for the badge. You can play for your own pride and self-respect. These are all things that I think matter, and I think things that are the markers of professionals in any field, in anywhere, is that you don't not play simply because you disagree with or have an issue with or anything like that. That being said, I think it was probably the worst tactical game I've ever seen from Eric Ten Hag at United in terms of the setup, the pass map that it showed. Forget the box midfield and the things like that. You're just talking about a box, um, where you had essentially 4 players deep and 6 players all the way up the pitch, with everything. Every time they pass it back to the goalkeeper, he'd send it long, and you'd end up running the other way off of that. You played a left-footed left back at center back in order to play a right-footed left back at left back. And then you didn't play out the back anyway, and instead just went long. There was nothing that made sense in this game from a tactical perspective, from an effort perspective, from a personnel perspective. None of it was working, and none of it was successful. I think every player on the pitch was frustrated, and at times visibly so. The changes in terms of the substitutions made no difference to the team. Nothing worked. I don't know what else to say about it. It was atrocious. It was a complete and utter outclassing from top to bottom that I think is representative of, a club that, whatever is behind it, Newcastle has itself sorted out in terms of what it's doing, where it's going, and where it wants to be as a club, and that filters all the way down to every single player on the pitch, compared to United, which is wholly representative of the absolute confusion, lack of leadership that pervades everywhere and everything. And so that's how I see it in a nutshell, the game that we watched.
The part that I'm confused about tactically with Ten Hag is when we looked at the Mason Mount balance problem in midfield at the start of the season, it was blatantly obvious that he was playing too high and United were getting exposed in midfield. So Scott McTominay is essentially playing that role now. Right? He's essentially playing the role that was defined earlier in the season that in a way United can't play. Because if you over possession, which they often do on a counter-attack, they're far too exposed. So Scott McTominay is a poor man's Mason Mount. He scores goals, but you would imagine you would have to argue that Mason Mount's technically better in possession. So that problem still hasn't been fixed. Away to Galatasaray, you're 3-1 up. Why are you trying to score a 4th goal? How can you
both perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, the free kick, don't get me wrong, Onana's to blame for 2, if not 3 of the goals going in, right? But the passage of play that led up to those could have been avoided, right? I mean, you simply cannot have a situation where the ball is given away on the edge of your box, the edge of the opposition's box, and the first time someone puts a tackle in is 5 yards outside of your box. And the guy that puts that tackle in is the guy that was ahead of the ball to receive it. Where's the rest of your midfield? I mean, it's such an obvious problem. And, Ten Hag at Holland always wanted to play with just one number 6 holding midfielder. And at United, he's not getting away with that. And this is odd to me because he clearly knows more about football than you, me, or anyone, right? He understands football, and I just don't understand how this is such an obvious problem. The performance at the weekend against Newcastle reminded me of a performance when Ranić was there, when United drew 1 each and Cavani scored, where they were absolutely awful, right? Against a really poor Newcastle team, to be fair. United say that Maguire one that goes in counts would have stolen a point. Same thing happened, right? And this is where I kind of give Ten Hag a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. No one is doing Ten Hag's job better for him and exculpating him from this than the players. When you go out and you don't do the basics, then it's very easy to blame the players and not Ten Hag. To me, if you're a professional, if I'm paying in to watch a professional event, there are certain things I think you should be guaranteed. You should be guaranteed that the performer shows up professional with an intent to win, that brings the intangibles, that has been prepared properly, that is mentally prepared, that is going to give it 100%, that is trying to win, that is trying to give the illusion that there's actually a competition taking place here, that before an athlete goes into an arena and accepts defeat, there are a number of layers that will prevent that from happening. If you don't like the manager, so what? How many Ballon d'Or winners have played for multiple managers and are still winning Ballon d'Ors? players that are exceptional for their country, also for their club. They don't care who they play for because they set their own standards. And there's certain things as a professional, it's your job to bring. Before you talk about a manager, your job is to show up to work every day 100% mentally, physically. Even, okay, we understand human beings have ebb and flow, so you're not always perfect, but the intangibles. And when I look back, James, at every single United manager that has been sacked since Ferguson, I looked at their last 5 games and I was reading the match reports from the last 5 games before each manager was sacked, identical.
Mm-hmm.
Brendan Rodgers, when United played Leicester at the FA Cup 4-2, said he was surprised at how easy it was to play through United's lines, play through the midfield. The next game, they lost 5-0 at home to Liverpool then against City. Same thing. United players meet with the press before Van Gaal gets sacked. Don't like his training methods. He's boring. He's too tense. He's not nice. He's not likable. He's all this. He's that. Then they go to Mourinho, right? Same thing. Mourinho's digging out the players, talking about their lack of physicality, talking about the fact that they refused to play through the paint barrier. He made sure Rashford was playing really, really deep. If you remember, he was basically a left midfielder rather than a left winger because he didn't trust him to get back, right? And Rashford hated it, right? Then he was too mean, so they kicked him out. Solskjaer at the end of that was too nice. And Ranić, was same thing. Ranić, we're the only team in the league that concedes these goals. There's no physicality. There's no one. I mean, this is, if I'm a professional, these are the things that would embarrass me. Your integrity is being questioned. To me, that's really simple. Every one of those football players at Manchester United need to ask themselves a question. Do I want to play at Manchester United? Because what I would have said to them players after the weekend, I would have said, one of two things happens. You bring your agent in Monday morning and you leave. Because if you don't want to play here, because what isn't an option is going out and doing that. Or if you do it again, I'll call your agent in and you leave. Because United don't give a manager that leverage. But any football club that's serious about winning, that has standards that are uncompromisable because they are the only goal that's acceptable to them is winning, would do that. If you did that at Real Madrid twice, you'd be out. You did that at City twice, you'd be out. But United, it's repeat, because the culture inside the football club, even since Ferguson and Gill was there, is about self-interest, self-preservation over the interests of the football club, and that infests the whole place from the top to the bottom. And I don't know if Ten Hag's the right guy. I don't know. There's certain legitimate criticisms, but every single thing that I'm seeing at United, I have seen over and over and over again. And those players, before you can point the finger at a manager, before you can point the finger at anyone else, point it at yourself first.
Yeah, I mean that part is to me 100% of it is that like you said in the beginning of that, the players in a lot of ways let Erik ten Hag off the book.
Mm-hmm.
If they're off the hook, I should say, if they're not trying their hardest, if they're not working the hardest in the match and on the pitch. Now, there's something to be said, and this is where it's there's no absolutes on these things. There's something to be said for in order to do your best, even from an effort perspective, one has to know what they're doing. It's very hard to put 100% into something when you're confused about. People can be very tentative when you start out, driving or learning to drive or do something like that.
Professional footballers on 3.
Oh, no. I agree with you. I agree with you.
That, but when Kobe Manu was growing up and embarrassing guys, I'm sorry, I'm excuses for them.
Of course, they can put the effort in. That part always has to be there. They may not be good. They may not always be good.
I can totally accept that.
Yeah, that part is like is where you have to look at each of their jobs. The player's job when they step onto the pitch, I think, to me, at the bare minimum is put yourself about. Just do that 100%. Run around, do something. I've always been a fan of players who do that at United, who run and put themselves. Yeah, and
put a perspective for his effort.
Yeah. It's why I've, again, understanding his qualities. I was very disappointed to see Fred leave the club. I've said that before, because I knew if he was playing, he'd always give 100%. No matter what happens, he's going to play. He's going to give it. he leaves. Okay. And you're left with a lot of players who don't do that, in my perspective. You look at the moment at Harry Maguire. He's putting in. I can never say that he's not putting a shift in every time he's played recently. One of the few players to do so. Luke Shaw came in once again. I think he put in a good shift. I think those were two best players. Harry Maguire and Luke Shaw. I think they're the only two players who actually did a job during that game, frankly, and could walk away. Well, maybe not the only two, but I think there are two of a very few select players who could walk away from that game saying they did their jobs. So, you have that idea of it, is that the manager's job is to select the best team, put the plan out there that's going to work. I think that's failing and isn't working. The players' jobs are to put the 100% effort in and carry out that plan. They're not doing that either. So now you have a problem here. If the manager isn't doing their job, just from a perspective of this argument, and the players aren't doing their job, who's making sure both of them do their job? Nobody. Nobody is.
100%.
Nobody's doing that at Manchester United, and nobody's been doing it for the last 10 years. There is nobody who is making sure that happens. I was speaking about this with some people in terms of my perspective on this, and it's sort of like, I think that Erik ten Hag's done a pretty poor job on certain things, but at the same time, I guess here's the point that I would put to it. In modern football, in some ways, the manager, like the players, should be, to a bit of a degree, disposable. The players should do what they're going to do regardless of the manager. You change the manager, it doesn't change the long-term plans of the club. There is no long-term plan at Manchester United. There never has been. There hasn't been for a long, long time. Sir Alex Ferguson had a long-term plan. He had a plan. And when he left, and that plan left, it was never replaced. There's never been a new plan put in place. There's never been a top-down direction put in place. If you had a real, and I don't mean this unfortunately to be insulting, but if you had a real director of football at Manchester United, they would be involved in all of this.
Of course, 100%.
They would be saying, this is the plan. I don't care if you don't like Ten Hag. I don't care who the manager is. I don't care if we have a new manager next month.
Agree.
You do the same thing every single day.
Agree.
And that is the problem at Manchester United. And so maybe it's right to change Erik ten Hag, but it's kind of funny. INEOS come in, and if they decide, I want to change managers at the end of the year. We want to change managers. We think there's another person that we should put in place here. Let's say they decide that. In a funny way, I'd rather they keep, even if this isn't made public, even if they haven't shared this with anybody, I'd rather they keep Erik ten Hag to the end of the season if they don't have someone they're replacing him with right now. At minimum, keep him to the end of the season, because I would like them to ingrain a culture in there. Let's say they bring someone like Paul Mitchell in there. I want them to start ingraining a culture in there now, that you play towards something no matter who the manager is, no matter what the manager says. You are working towards something for the purpose of this club. And if you're not going to do that, then you cannot be a part of Manchester United moving forward. And there's a culture there that I think you could almost see as being a necessary pain to go through. I mean, you could put whoever you want at manager. We should expect the same thing out of the players, not necessarily in terms of the overall performance, but in terms of the effort, what they're going for, what they're trying to do. And so it's kind of, in some ways, irrelevant how much at fault Ten Hag is there until this is resolved.
We have to face a couple of facts. You run a business. I run a business. And I've said this before. Employees inside businesses work towards the goals they're incentivized to achieve. And those goals are defined by the priorities of the owner, right? This is what I want from my company. This is how I define success. There's not a single Manchester United manager in the last 10 years who would have got sacked by finishing in the top four. If every single one of them was sacked for not finishing in the top four, right? Or when it looked like they weren't going to finish top four, that's when their job went. That's when Moyes went. Okay, all of that. This is what the club's goal is. There's no one's job inside that football club depends on them winning trophies. That tells you everything about what they are. Now, here's the thing. If you're a football club and you no longer buy at the top of the market, okay, and you're buying players that you want to develop, okay, you have to accept a couple of things. One, it's not realistic to expect to win championships when you're a football club buying potential, okay? Two, if you want that from your club, you have to have the best coaches, the best setup for development, the best everything. The problem with a massive club like Manchester United is their history is an albatross around their neck. So their fans and everyone else want them to win right now. But the problem is they don't have the players to do that. If you look at the players that played against Newcastle, not one of them have won a Premier League. Not one of them have won a European Cup. Not one of them have come close to winning anything on the international stage, and none of them are close to a Ballon d'Or, right? This summer, Eric Ten Hag signed Onana, all his. Mason Mount, a guy that played 9 Premier League games last season that is now constantly injured again. A striker that couldn't play 90 minutes for 2 months, who scored 9 Serie A goals, whose backup hasn't been able to complete 90 minutes in 3 years. A left back that Tottenham weren't even going to register. A free transfer at centre half. And Sofian Amrabat, a lone midfielder at the lowest price possible in the market on the last day of the window, because the only other club that was interested in him was Galatasaray. United's last game of the Champions League is against Bayern Munich, a team that won the league last year and almost offended that they only won it by a goal. Signed Harry Kane, right? I had signed Kim Min-jae. United in those positions, like I said, signed Johnny Evans on a free and signed a young kid that is nothing but potential, who still has yet to score a Premier League goal. So the question is, looking at how United buy, it's not a football club trying to win the league. We want to win the league because that's our expectation as Manchester United fans, but nothing inside that football club is geared towards that. No functioning football department is geared towards that. It is an aptitude, and none of these departments are set up in such a way as to make sure that the club achieves that objective. It's not even a good football club to develop young players in, because at clubs like Brighton, where young players develop, they're allowed to be inconsistent. They're allowed to make mistakes without massive scrutiny being put on them. But at United, you don't get that. So they're at this massive football club that are lost their identity because they can no longer afford or no longer want to buy the top players to win the titles. And these kids, Garnacho and all that, magnificent talents, Manu, as soon as they have a bad game, they're slaughtered, they're this, they're that. The negativity is unbelievable, and they don't have the quality around them to help them. And so this is a football club that has a serious crisis on the inside, because the owners don't care what you and I care about. They care about making sure that football club is profitable, or making sure it's in a position where they can sell it.
Yeah.
Even if you look at the managers teams, right? Just quickly.
Yeah.
Was David Moyes a top manager? No.
No.
When was the last time Louis van Gaal had won anything at club level?
Yeah.
Right? Mourinho was definitely on the way down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Solskjaer, clearly not a top manager, right?
Yep.
Ranić hadn't managed the club in 10 years, or at least that. And Ten Hag's a maybe, right? He had a couple of good years at Ajax, but so did Frank de Boer. You don't know. So United, if you look at what they've been doing, nothing remotely related to trying to win trophies and going all out to do it. It's always been patchwork here, patchwork there, patchwork here, patchwork there. And that's exactly what's been going on over the last couple of years.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even on the manager front, Jose Mourinho, the right time to hire him was right after Sir Alex retired.
Yeah.
There was some talk of it back then, and he was right at the top of his career, and they didn't. They went with a different way, and then they got him too late. And they've done that with plenty of players too. You buy Casemiro 3 years too late. You buy Varane 3 years too late. You do all of this late. It's always late. It's always at poor timing, and it is that top-down strategy that's just wrong, and it pervades everything. I think that that Eric Ten Hag has many issues going on right now. But if he's to lose his job, it should be for understandable reasons and nothing to do with players don't like him, players this and that. At the same time, to look at some objective truths here as well, or lack of objective truths here. There's not necessarily 100% truth in many of the stories that get written about the dressing room and things like that as well, in terms of what comes out there. There was a lot of stories under Ralph Rangnick, and the majority of them were coming from one person that made it sound like it was everybody. And that happens too.
Sure.
But the issue with player power is a challenging one that I just want to discuss as well from a more of a theoretical standpoint. I was hugely disappointed with the way that the Jose Mourinho and Pogba situation played out. It's interesting. You have Nemanja Matic. It's come today. He gave an interview in Serbia on a podcast and talked about how there was players who were late all the time, and named specifically Jadon Sancho, which we know about, and Pogba. It was well known by players, coaches, and staff that Pogba was one of the laziest players in the United dressing room, and the standards for what he brought were extremely low. Jose had a couple public kind of bust-ups with him. He's a player who asked to leave, and essentially Jose Mourinho was sacked for Paul Pogba at the end of the day. In essence, when you have a player who publicly challenges a manager in the way that he did, and publicly goes against him in the way that he did, similar to what Ronaldo did with Erik ten Hag, in some ways, by not getting rid of said player, you've completely killed that manager off in the dressing room, because there is still a degree of authority that they need to have happen. And I was hugely disappointed in that. And I think that getting rid of Ronaldo strengthened Erik ten Hag's authority in the dressing room in a positive way last year. I think it was the right decision, the way that was all went, that all went about, even though, again, it should have been done during the summer. It should have been done during the summer, and he should have been replaced. And instead, it was dragged out till it was too late, to where the only option they could do was bring in Weghorst during January as a replacement. So they still go about it the wrong way. But it is a balance, and again, it comes down to haphazard decision making, because you don't have a leader in the above the manager. So when I say the manager isn't doing their job, the players aren't doing their job, who's in charge of all of that? And that is where the leadership is severely lacking, because otherwise the decision becomes financial. And Pogba was kept because of his financial,
Of course,
because of the financials of it. Ronaldo was kept during last summer because of the financials of
course.
it. And so if you go coach and players and all of that, and there's nobody here as a CEO who's a football person, or a director who's really running the show and given the authority to do so, then it just goes all the way up to the board, and they're going to make financial decisions, which is what the Glazers do. They make financial decisions.
Why do they make financial decisions? Because that's how they're incentivized. That's how they're valued.
Yeah,
that is what they're
exactly. That's what they care about.
But I don't blame them. They're working for the Glazers. See, they're executing tactics.
Correct.
Game plan of their owners, because of consequences for not doing so. If you were in Manchester United's commercial department, and you were showing up half the days a year, couldn't be arsed, not doing what you're told, how long would you last for? You'd be gone immediately. They would not tolerate that at all. That's because of obvious reasons, because that's their priority. Right, it's a whole the cost analysis decision on whether to get rid of players is based on what's your commercial value, right? I mean, they gave Rooney a new contract 2012, and it was because of his commercial value, right? He was the only player at that time that all sponsors asked for. He was the only star, right? So when he went, it was 2010. It was when he said, "United have no ambition." Questioned their ambition, and they caved and gave him the contract. And it was for this reason, it was commercial reason, right? So Rooney's commercial value was much more than his football value at that point. So this is the problem. This is what everything's derivative of that. So there's no control parameters at the club that says this is on bending discipline, because everything is taken on how much is this going to cost? Is this going to cost too much? We'll undermine our manager before we'll pay $5 million, and this is all. But see, this doesn't happen at top clubs. It's the top clubs that they said everything is about winning that league at the end of the year, and if we don't do that, right, we're going to make sure that you don't have any excuses. So in an environment like that, it weeds out bluffers really quickly, right? So if you can't survive in an environment like that, you don't last in an environment like that. But it also attracts people that want to be in that environment. I question these players when I hear things like Ronaldo doing interviews and questioning their standards. When I see Paul Scholes and other players, Roy Keane, Gary Neville, just ripping them on TV about their attitude, about, their performance, and, Sky showing certain players, refusing to run. The stats at this weekend show that United covered the least amount of ground in the Newcastle game in comparison to any other game this season. Where's their shame internally? Like, at what point do they turn around and go, this is embarrassing. I don't want to get, ruined on TV by fellow pros and have my integrity questioned. Because if I don't think that I'm part of that criticism, I want to leave. All right, I think it's aimed at me. I'm not taking the blame for these people. Because the one thing I'll say about Ronaldo is I'm out, and that's what top players do. They don't stay because they can't tolerate that environment. They can't concede, they can't lose, they can't surrender. It's offensive to them. And players that are bluffers, that sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes they feel up for it if the vibe's right. Those players, they're a dime a dozen. Every football club has 5 or 6 of them. But the winners, the real winners, they are at the top clubs that consistently win. And none of those players at Manchester United have any right to get a manager sacked when they don't win anything ever. How many of them would leave right now to a better club in a better situation?
Yeah. Vast majority of them.
Why do you think they don't leave?
Yeah.
Because there's no one else wants them.
Yeah.
Oh, Jadon Sancho, there should be clubs falling over themselves for Jadon Sancho. United should have a bidding war in January. Why won't they? Because so few people want them. How many? I'm serious. Like, maybe 3-4 players on that team, if they really wanted to leave, would have top clubs still interested in them.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, there's not many.
United couldn't sell McTominay and Maguire this summer for more than 30, 40 million. These are players that are starting every week for United. Why?
Yep.
Why can't they sell them? Why isn't the big club saying, do you know what? The manager's to blame. These players are not to blame. We want, because all these other clubs, they have top agents, they share players, they share international changing rooms. Half the players who started against Newcastle can't even get their international team. They will know everything that's going on at football clubs. They will know why players are doing this. These are players, somehow their international managers don't think it's the manager's fault. Why are they not having clubs knocking their door down for them? To me, I think that for these United players, I'm sick and tired of giving them an out, because they will go to Anfield and find it really easy to convince themselves to surrender, because they've already got an excuse. They've already blamed it on someone else. Anthony Martial should not be on a professional football pitch, James.
Yeah.
No disrespect, that guy. He's not the most enthusiastic lad in the world anyway, but I rarely see the lad break a sweat, break a jog. But to me, this is more of an indictment on Manchester United than Anthony Martial or Eric Ten Hag. Why is he there? How many other Premier League clubs would Anthony Martial's team get into? He's there because nobody else wants him. And this is the problem, right? And Sevilla took him on loan, sent him back, said, nope. Nobody, United will cover his wages, we'll pay. Nope. No one wants him. No one's even want to take a risk on him, because you shouldn't be on a professional football pitch. And when you can't press from the first line and they get out that easy, you're under pressure everywhere else, especially whenever you've got Garnacho and Rashford not willing to track back. But I just think this spreads right throughout the team. Anthony Martial should not be starting for any Premier League team, never mind one that takes serious, finished in the top 5, 4.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is the case, and like I said, it is all about the standards across the board, and the overall plan that we're seeing symptomatic of it. It's all symptomatic. It's all symptomatic of the core problems that exists, and and hopefully, we've said this before, but I think, unfortunately, changing the managers as we've done in the past even appointing directors in the way that we've done in the past, making transfers that we've done in the past, it's all cosmetic. It's cosmetic changes. It's new paint, because underneath it, it's still a crumbling, edifice. The infrastructure, the structure, the setup, everything's wrong. And so I can only hope that, and I understand that this has caused instability among staff, coaches, players, things like that, in terms of not knowing their future. But the only thing I can say is it's too bad. That this is kind of the death throes of something that is going to change at its core now. Because obviously the major thing coming here, and that we do have news on, because obviously we could go on probably forever on the players, on the issues, on the lack of success.
One other question on Ten Hag.
Yeah.
So let's say you sack Ten Hag today.
Mm-hmm.
If you replace him with him, why would he succeed where Ten Hag failed?
It won't.
So that's my point.
Yeah.
It's like, you're still asking a guy to get in a Mini Cooper and compete with Ferraris and say, okay, we're going to change your driver, get you in, we change new tires, we spray painted the car, go. Go compete. To me, it's like this is silly at this point.
Yeah, I personally can very much understand if in the long term you want a different manager. Fine. I don't think sacking Erik ten Hag today does anything for the team. I don't think it improves the club. I don't think it's going to make the season better. I don't think interim managers work either, for what it's worth. I think they're usually a disaster. The best possible example was when Ole Gunnar Solskjaer came in, and by the end of the season, it still collapsed, and he missed out on top 4. Didn't win anything that year. I don't think there's any point in that. I think you bring in an interim, you end up finishing where you had. I think even when the season that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer got sacked, you ended the season under Ralph Rangnick probably right where you would have ended if you'd kept him the whole year and seen how it played out if you kept Ole the whole season. I don't think there's a point in that. I don't think it improves things. I think that correctly you start top down and you work your way through there, and then you make the decisions based on that. It's the same as making one transfer in January is not fixing this club. It's not going to fix the performances. It's not. It is cosmetic, but there is a significant, obviously, change that needs to come, and that is obviously who's running the football side of this, all of this, because as we said, and as we were just talking about, the remit of the football club is commercial success and financial success. It is not football success. And until that purpose changes and success is defined by trophies, by winning, then everything else below it doesn't matter. In order to do anything, you have to start with the initial plan in mind, the initial goal in mind. You start a business and the goal is to make money. Well, you're going to make decisions everywhere down the way to make money. If you start a business and your goal is to change the landscape of some culture or some aspect of business or something that's going on out in the world, then every decision you make is going to lead towards that. And
if you start a business and you want to make money by having the best product in the market, because you take pride in the product and the finished goods, then you have a much more sustainable business model, because you'll invest more in research and development, you'll invest more in people, you'll invest in all the other things. If your goal is just to get a product on the market that you could profit off, then you won't do those things, because you're not really concerned about how good the product is. You're just concerned that it can be sold, right? You have no pride in finished good. You really don't care if someone thinks it's great or someone thinks it's mid. Doesn't matter, just as long as they pay for it. That will always be reflected on what you see as the final product. What goes on the market will be reflected about what went into it. So when you're asking someone to run a company that is just trying to get a product on the market and be sold, and compare the final quality of his product with someone who's running a company who is every resource is poured into getting the best product on the market, we really shouldn't expect that those people to compete, because they're maybe in the same industry, but they're not in the same market.
Yeah, and of course, unfortunately, this is the problem with football, is what Ed Woodward said about there's no real connection between the success on the pitch and their financials. It means nothing. is disconnected, and United as a brand are going to make enough money kind of no matter what they put on the pitch. And so that has to change. And so obviously, this is the main story, and I think we have a few things to talk about on this now. Obviously, alongside, there was a story from Kleiman this morning that the Jim Ratcliffe bid for the 25% of the club is set to go through and be announced next week. I think on last week's podcast, they said that Sir Jim was on holiday through about the 9th of the month. And so I could see it going a couple more weeks till beyond that, because it's not at the stage in which you have these major negotiations going on and the deal is in any sort of real danger or anything like that. It's simply a matter of the complex legalities that go into finalizing the whole thing and putting it all together. And I think that, we got information kind of backing this up on our side as well for some time now, but through this morning too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I do believe that the deal will go through or be announced next week. When you look at it, I think, if I'm not mistaken, if I understand what has been said, I believe it's already been approved by the Glazers, the offer itself.
Yes, that's what I was told.
Because that's not the last thing. The offer previously went to a vote multiple times. And that's way before all the legalities and things are being done. So if it's set to being announced next week, or it's about to be announced, and they're working on the final details, as far as I understand it, if I'm not wrong, that would come after the approval from the board on the deal itself, because you're not going to go through drafting the contracts and all the tiny minutia that are going into this, making the tender offer to the Class A shareholders, which is something that has to be done publicly. You're not doing any of that, which would come at the time of the announcement, unless you already have the approval of the Glazers. And so, as far as I've heard it, you've heard it, as we understand it, I believe that the Glazers have already approved this offer from their perspective, and it's a matter of all of the details that go into that and getting it finalized and actually done now.
Also told they were really angry with what happened at the weekend. Obviously, they want to get an influence that culture as quick as possible. Of course, Ten Hag's under scrutiny, as he should be, and even if he's winning every game, there should always be a contingency plan of what if something happens, what do we do next? It shouldn't catch you by surprise. We know that manager's shelf life is usually about 3-4 years. They rotate, regardless of what happens. So it's entirely appropriate that INEOS ask those questions about Ten Hag, and certainly. No matter what the situation inside the football club, you just can't keep losing games of football to teams without any, consolation or any reason to be optimistic. You have to see progress at some point. And I was told that there was a 1.7 billion fund set aside for investment over the next couple of years inside the club, and that. The pathway to ownership was something that they were telling me was something that would be announced with that. So, I don't have definitive language on that, but what they said to me was that that was something that they expected would be announced with the deal, and that they were confident that would be done. So, obviously, when you're dealing with something on this size, you're dealing with lawyers, a lot of back and forth. Their job is to get as much billable hours as possible, so they're in no rush to get anything completed. But
you mean lawyers don't work quickly on purpose?
But so it is, suppose. But you're quite right. I mean, look, if there was anything where this wasn't going to be happening, or was any unforeseen or any impediments, we'd know about it by now, and certainly don't go to this degree whenever there's no broad agreement on everything. But it seems like we talk about it forever, and I'm sure, like everyone else, they're fed up hearing about it. But just lastly, I want to touch on this thing, James, that Kavi Sokoho put out. Said that Ten Hag had lost 50% of the dressing room. Gorman GPS could lose 50% of that dressing room. This is irrelevant to me. It never had 50% of it, because these players, doesn't take much to lose them, because there really isn't much in the way of worth keeping anyway. I hope he never finds them. But it's irrelevant to me. And this is just to me illustrates one point though. It's genuinely staggering to me that players are so far removed from the sentiment of fans that they think this would be a good idea to leak this information through one or two representatives and think that this is going to fall upon sympathetic ears or people with the memory of a goldfish. I put a tweet out earlier that listed every single situation players revolted against Van Gaal, players revolted against Mourinho, players revolted against Solskjaer, players turn on run. I mean, it's the same shit. At some point, you have to realize that your credibility is in question. 8 of the players who played against Newcastle played for Ranić.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that as we were saying, the only way you can endear yourself as a player is to put 100% in. If you're not doing that, if you give up, you're going to get the blame, and rightly so. If you're putting it in, I'll say this, like, and it's, against Galatasaray, I don't think I had many complaints about the effort levels of the players. They still drew. And so most of the criticism was leveled, I think, at Erik ten Hag and Andre Onana, of course, for the individual mistakes on that. I think the vast majority of the criticism was leveled at them because you don't have other players who are necessarily putting themselves in the spotlight. And it is very foolish to put yourself in the spotlight with stories, with leaks, and without putting the effort in on the pitch. Because I don't think it's endearing to other teams. If you're going to leave or if anything's going to happen, I don't think it's going to rush to get the manager out in the perspective. At the same time, I also want to say that, some of it is journalism, a good chunk of it too, in terms of the way that these things are timed. You take this stuff about the players running and the training and things like that. I've been talking about that from the sources that I have that are also not players for about 3 months now. This isn't new. And I think some of it is timed in how it's released in order to put the maximum amount of drama into the situation, the maximum amount of talks and clicks and time spent discussing all of these types of things too, because it's, that's just how business is done. That is that is a separate thing. It's something that there's been concerns about for some time, but it's not like today, Harry Maguire's walking in and saying, Eric, we run too much in training. That's not what happened. That's not how this is going.
Remember the first thing Solskjaer said when he took over about, he goes, he criticized United players fit.
Robust. Yeah, he said they wanted to be the most
They're
robust
the fittest team in the league. Yeah. And he said they weren't fit. Now, bear in mind, Mourinho got sacked in December, right? And he said that, these players unbelievably are not fit. Ranić, don't see it. Criticized their fitness, criticized their physicality, criticized their intensity, and the fact that they were always injured. And you can go back and back and back. Mourinho, I remember his first season was picking and choosing the last few games of the season about what squad he would play because he said that the players weren't fit enough to play. And these are consistent criticisms that follow these players throughout their careers about not being fit, which to me again is a basic responsibility of a professional athlete. Right? You're not going to coach these players how to play football. Okay, you're not going to teach these players how to play football. By the time you get to this level, okay, you're not working on ball skills. You're not dribbling through. You're perfecting certain routines. You're perfecting certain skills. And most of the stuff that people work on, they work on individually. Free kicks, they do stuff, but they're not doing what you're doing with 10-year-olds, teaching them how to control a ball, teach them all that stuff's done, right? At this point, it's about perfection. It's about perfecting certain routines. It's about perfecting certain things. But in terms of the objective stuff, being fit, I mean, to me, that's a basic responsibility of a professional footballer. And first thing Ten Hag does when he comes in, just like Solskjaer, just like Mourinho, just like Ranić, after Brentford, you're not fit.
Yeah.
Right? This is unacceptable. I'm sorry.
Mhm.
These players are, anyway. I'm just saying, mate, for me, but again, this is reflective of the culture at United where they
Yeah.
have no tolerance. And you're absolutely right. There should be a director of football in there above Ten Hag going, he whether he goes or not is irrelevant to your future.
Yep.
Okay, your
Correct.
future and
Correct.
what happens next to you has nothing to do with him. So
Yep.
you think that this place isn't big enough for both of you. If he goes, you go with him.
Yeah, and that leads to there was one story from last week that I do want to address because I think it has some credibility, and it came from Semi Mockbell, Daily Mail journalist in London, who I think is quite credible in his reports. I think he's a good journalist. He's not doesn't tend to do a lot of clickbait things like that. He's very well sourced in these areas, and he was talking about the recruitment strategy under INEOS, because one of the you know at the end of the day, in some respect, I think that football is about 80% getting your recruitment right. The best players win.
100%.
That's it. I mean, that's just a fact of sports, right? The best players win. You get the best players, you win. And obviously you want to there's factors into that. How do they fit together and all of that? That's the smartness of recruitment. But I think 80% of football is recruitment. Pep Guardiola doesn't win the treble without the best team in England and the best team in Europe. It doesn't happen. I don't care how good a coach he is. It doesn't happen. You got to have the best team.
Well, you
And
think
you got
about
to figure out how to put
best
them
players
together.
in Pep's team. How many of them are the best players? I mean, Rodri. I mean, was he? How many players? How many clubs were after Rodri before he came to City? Wasn't one of the best players in the world. Bernardo Silva, he cost 37 million from Monaco.
Yeah.
Nathan Ake, Akanji. These are players that are scouted forensically,
Correct.
properly,
Yep.
where they know this is exactly what we want. Kovacic, even De Bruyne. These are players. We had Mahrez. These are not Ballon d'Or level footballers, but Guardiola knows exactly what he wants, how he wants it, and it's a result of a coherent football strategy plan that knows how to identify a player.
Correct. And that is, I mean, that is the fact of it. I think the biggest error that United have made and that has cost most of the managers has simply come down to poor recruitment at the end of the day, not being able to put a cohesive team together that is able to carry out whatever the plan may be. And there was a lot of reports that was one of the major factors INEOS were looking at, of course, there's been a lot of talk of this. We know this to be true because one of the key things that they want to change is obviously why they want to have sporting control. Well, what does that actually mean? I mean, at the end of the day, sporting control is really about recruitment. More than anything. It's because what you're talking about with control is how do you bring in the right people? And yeah, some of that is administrative, bringing in the right people above the manager and all that. But why? So you can recruit the right players, so you can get the right people in place and all of that more than anything else. And anyway, what this report said was that potentially two things that it said is that they might bring in potentially 2 recruitment people. And I think there's a good chance of something like that. A lot of clubs have, multiple people from a recruitment perspective. And so you look at names like Paul Mitchell, which still continues to be one of the main names. There's been a lot of talk of Dougie Friedman. You could see both coming in there and having a part in this. And the other thing that it said was to buy the best players in England. And it said British, but when you read into the article itself, it talks about buying players who are experienced in the Premier League. And there is a logic to that when you're trying to stabilize and bring together a good team, especially when you're playing in England, to bring in the best players in England. Consistently, United have failed in bringing players in from other leagues that have not transitioned well to the Premier League and have struggled with it. There is something to be said for Premier League experience. Liverpool did an amazing job bringing in players who had experience in England to form a lot of the core of their team. You think about Van Dijk, you think about Mane, you think about Robertson, you think about these players that they've brought in. These are players who are in England, who made up the core of that team. City have obviously they brought players in from all over the place, which is fantastic. But they've brought in a lot of good players to bring up the core of the team who had that experience as well. United have spent a lot of money on players from other leagues that have failed. Jadon Sancho, Pogba. I looked at their top 10 transfers. 7 of them were from outside the Premier League. And I think the only one you'd consider a success is Bruno Fernandes. And it's not to say that you should only buy British or you should only buy English players or anything like that, because then you're losing yourself a large majority of.
Because I mean, if you look at two of United's most criticised players, it's Maguire and Rashford.
Sure.
I think I get what you're saying, right? One of the things I don't like about this is it goes back to this whole we need people that's going to get the club or United DNA.
Yeah.
Matt Busby had never worked at United before.
Yeah.
They didn't have United DNA.
Yeah.
To me, I think a winner's a winner, right? To me, I think there's nothing that's descriptive about an English guy that defines him as someone that's better for United. I understand Premier League experience is very important because it is a difficult league to adapt to. But, I do think that Jude Bellingham didn't have La Liga experience, right? I still think one of the reasons why United fail is because they don't buy the best players in the world. So there's always a major risk attached to these players, maybe, right? And so I think that if you look at some of the best players in the Premier League, they have a lot of them have come from abroad. Right? De Bruyne, Salah both had Premier League experience by the time they came back, right? So, but even Cantona and all that, I totally take your point, and there's legitimacy to a lot of that. But I think also you look at people like Drogba and players like that. I think if you buy the right players, you scale properly. Then, but the problem is that because United don't do any of that, the probability of failure is high. And the football club is designed to nurture players because of the way they treat them.
Well, and I think that that's kind of the point. Is that you want the right balance of these things.
Yeah.
One of the things where one of the criticisms of, say, bringing in someone like Paul Mitchell is that he's not necessarily been a director of football at a top club like City has, But when you take someone like him, you say, well, what did he do well? Well, he was the guy who was able to find these talents from other leagues, from other countries, from places like that before they were the big name. And I'm not saying just super young players that wouldn't develop at United and bring them in. Dougie Freedman, the same. You look at some of the players who are Crystal Palace. There's 3 players. I mean, there's multiple players at Palace that today United could sign that would be better than what they have right now.
And you brought up this point. He's never worked for a club that's actually won their division. So he's brand players for developmental teams. Leipzig, right? Monaco, people like that. They're bring a player in, develop, sell. Bring a player in, develop, sell. And if we happen to win trophies, fine, right? So I think it was Ibrahimovic was saying it's a whole different thing managing young players, developing young players, and dealing with the top players in the world. Because that's a whole different thing. And so this is where United have got to figure out what they are. I mean, they've always balanced that well. They've always been a club that's played youth, that's developed young players, and some supplemented that with some of the best players in the world. But I have concerns about, Siki Bagura came from Barcelona. They bought the top players in the world. They knew exactly what they wanted to do. And to me, I'm not going to get excited about Paul Mitchell because he's a shiny new toy. I still think it'd be better than anything that United have had before. But there's another aspect of this where these people are unproven too.
Yeah, correct. And I think that at the end of the day, it comes down to a consistent strategy can be sensible. It's pretty easy, I think, to identify the best players in England. The best Premier League players. You don't need a proper director to do that. And if the strategy is let's buy the best players in the Premier League and let's utilize, Paul Mitchell or whoever it may be to identify the best upcoming talents as well from around Europe and at least bring together a cohesive strategy on that, United will be far better off because they have the resources to do something. And so you can kind of piece together what the strategy may be, and whether it's the best strategy will remain to be seen, but it's a hell of a lot better than what's been being done. And you can kind of see the picture that's coming to play there, as well as with, Jean-Claude Blanc. I think one of the obvious positives you have there is he is somebody who has a track record at the biggest clubs in Europe. Juventus, biggest club in Italy, PSG. He has a record of these things. And so, at the end of the day, the results will speak for themselves when they come into play and make these things happen. But I think this is where United are at, is to say, let's put something into place here that's gonna work. Let's put something into place here that's cohesive, that's top down, and see if we can't make this happen here. I mean, not every director of football has had to have, similar to coaches, has had to have top level experience. Julian Ward, Michael Edwards, they didn't have winning experience before they helped Klopp build what Liverpool is today. It's simply about having a solid plan and sticking to it. And they did a really good job, I think, specifically as a model, more than Manchester City.
I completely agree.
Liverpool did an amazing job in that model, where they did buy a lot of really good players in England, but from also around Europe, without ever really chasing the stars. And they built something incredible with that. And I think that's more duplicatable. And then you look at what Arsenal are doing right now under Edu with them, and they haven't won anything yet. So time will tell before he heaped too much praise on them.
To be fair, I mean,
yeah,
Arsenal
it's way better than it's been for a decade. I mean, we'd be happy to be performing like they are at the moment. Yeah,
this is the best Arsenal since Wenger. You're right.
Absolutely, and it's the same strategy. They've bought a lot of the top Premier League players. They bought Declan Rice. They brought in Gabriel Jesus. They brought in Zinchenko. They brought in, a lot of these players, and then they picked the right young players from out and around Europe, and they suffered for a couple of years in doing this and getting rid of these senior players, these older players on big contracts and all of that. But it's starting to pay, dividends for sure. And I think that that's one way to look at it.
Aubameyang out, all those players showing up late for team meetings, all that. You know what? There's an uncompromising discipline. If you don't like me because I'm enforcing discipline, then go somewhere where there's no discipline. Okay? There's clubs out there that'll let you do that, but we're not going to do that here. That's what turned it around for Arsenal.
Yes.
Arsenal were perpetually in the position United were in, just trying to get top four and missing out. Weak players, constantly bullied, some talented players, a couple of smatterings of young players from their academy, and just the same thing over and over again until they decided that, no, we're going to stand by our manager, because let's be honest, Arsenal players wanted Arteta out, fans, everything. It's not just about standing by the manager, it's about standing by uncompromising principles at the football club that's going to lead us to our decisions. So that we aren't, because you see, if you have uncompromising principles, you aren't confused about what to do with Mason Greenwood, you aren't confused about why fans have a reaction to Arnautovic or the Premier League. But when you're constantly trying to make money and forget about that, then you end up in these situations. So when United make those changes and adhere to those principles, which hopefully INEOS will bring, then you will definitely see dividends. And look, City are catchable. I mean, to me, if you have, Guardiola said after United, if you have a proper football club, the proper departments that make smart decisions, of course they could catch City. There's nothing City done on the pitch that's beyond the financial reach of United.
Yeah, Liverpool and Arsenal have done it. Yeah, at this point in time, they have done it.
Yeah. So anyway, we did have Chelsea at the week in midweek prediction.
It's at home, which helps. Chelsea obviously have struggles of their own, but you also know that Pochettino was going to want to do what he does against United, so I expect he'll play pretty aggressive. I think it'll be a pretty open game. I think it'll be 2-2. I think it'll be a 2-2 draw.
We'll see. Okay, we'll leave it there, mate. Take it easy. Thanks, folks. Yeah. Thanks for all of you for downloading the podcast as always. But, who knows where we'll be next week on this emotional roller coaster. Hopefully with next week, no later next week, we'll have something on this Jim Ratcliffe thing, because my God, do you need that before Liverpool? We will see. A big, tough games coming up, so we'll see. Hopefully it doesn't get any worse. All right, man, take it easy. Thanks, James.
See you later.